Hello and welcome to episode 19, Counter-terrorism and Intelligence Operations from the Lens of Afghanistan. To take a deep dive into this topic, we have today with us Lucas Weber. Hi, Lucas. Welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you very much, Lucas, for your precious time. Without any delay, I would like to actually take a jump into the subject. And I would say, prior to starting with the actual topic, as we have a broad range of audience from the space and defense industry, including of course the international security field. So can you please tell us in on a basic terms, or in a basic meaning, I would say, of what is terrorism, counter-terrorism, and why this term has gained prominence in the modern world?
Terrorism, simply defined, is the use of threats and violence against a population or property to intimidate and coerce a government, civilian population in furtherance of political and social objectives. And then counter-terrorism, uh, it employs a number of military strategies that governments, law enforcement, businesses, non governmental organizations, research groups, and intelligence agencies use to combat or eliminate or nullify terrorism. And this can take place in the physical world with um, uh, police raids, military operations, drone strikes, or it can take place online where these organizations, the aforementioned groups, counter nefarious actors that are using social media messaging applications, the internet, and the dark web. And this also applies to terrorist fundraising. And a notable trend has been terrorist use of cryptocurrency, as this space, compared to the financial space, is much less regulated and more easy to exploit. And although great power competition is kind of emerging as the primary focus of the US and the West, China and Russia, and the global war on terrorism really winds down yet continues at a low level in the background. There's actually more terrorist groups, militant or jihadist groups, for instance, than there was on 9/11, which kind of kicked off the global war on terror. So terrorism is here to stay, and it will continue on, even though more and more resources are devoted to countering China and Russia. And this also creates a risk of insufficient attention paid to malicious actors, hostile actors that could pull off, any range of attacks.
Excellent. I think this is a very broad term, and I'm really glad that you mentioned, especially even about the terrorism financing, because in general, what happens in the space, and especially I would say in the space industry, we when we hear the term counterterrorism, people only relate it to the military, but they're unaware about the fact that there is a whole different world related to the financing. Then there is dark web as well. So I believe these all the elements also contribute to the counterterrorism. And just out of curiosity, because I have been actually following your work throughout so for a year or so, especially reading the articles from Militant Wire. So can you also give a brief overview of your journey into this field, and how of course, ended up you being an expert in this field of counterterrorism?
Yeah, well, I was always very interested in throughout the war on terror in jihadist groups and violent non-state actors in particular. And then I took an undergraduate in economics, but on my free time, I found myself reading literature about terrorist groups and the newest studies and everything. So I decided after my undergraduate to pursue graduate studies in focused on terrorist groups. And while I was doing this, I started writing for a number of different outlets. And then two of my colleagues who we exchanged ideas and information, asked each other questions because we had different specializations that complemented each other. One is Tom Lord, who is a expert on Mediterranean security, particularly in Greece and Turkey. And the other is he goes by the name War Noir, and he's a world-class weapons analyst. So we were able to come up with an idea to form our own outlet and our own research network. So we started publishing articles by the three of us, and then it kind of developed organically, the Militant Wire Research Network, and people started asking if they could submit to us. So our writing roster it expanded very quickly, and then we kind of changed our approach and made it an outlet where people could submit to, and we've grown a worldwide robust network of experts on all kinds of different areas, different area experts and experts on different militant groups or aspects of irregular warfare. And yeah, it just kind of all happened organically and almost by chance that we connected with each other and came up with this idea. So that's how I personally got into it, and then met up with my co-founders, and we developed Militant Wire and built this really great network full of really world-class researchers and nice people.
Amazing. So I believe I have always believed that, the college or any kind of networking is the kind of a best place to connect with the people and start your business. And I believe that's something that has happened with you as well. You connected with your friends, you shared the ideas, and you started this. And I believe also before, I started following Militant Wire, I used to follow some of the websites where such kind of, analysis was provided. But I'm very much aware of the fact that Militant Wire really gives a good analysis about even, the articles which are freely available. And I see a lot of websites on the other platform. They don't really, educate the people or the civilians about this. But I'm really glad Militant Wire is doing it by keeping
Yeah,
the articles free, because I believe the topic counterterrorism is something that shouldn't be only concentrated to, the military or the space or defense or the security people. The common people also need to understand, because they can be a victim of it anytime, as we were speaking
yeah,
about terrorism financing as well. So I'm really glad you have kept those articles free, because I have been mostly reading those articles and your
yeah,
personal
and
opinions
we
as well. Yeah.
yeah, and we kind of and this is kind of taking an aside, but what we try to do with our approach to Militant Wires, um, we do give like very technical analysis. However, we present it in a kind of brief uh, way, simplified version. So both academics and experts or professionals in the industry, or just normal people with who are interested in these things can understand. And we also promised ourselves when we started that the debate, the media debate, the public discourse has become so polarized and even propagandized that a lot of what comes out of the West, where some of us are based, I myself am based, is more about pushing narratives rather than objectivity is not achievable, but we try to be as objective as possible. And we wanted to appeal to people globally, no matter what their nationality is, their national allegiances, or their view on global politics. So we don't want to push a Western-centric information on our audience, and we want to be honest to our readers. And I think this has really gone over well and set us apart in some way.
Yes, I think this core value, of giving the right information, not aligning with any kind of narrative, but giving, the right on ground report of what is happening is very important. And I believe, yeah, the results are in front of us. In a very short time, I think you have grown to a quite an appreciable extent. I will also actually put up the link of Militant Wire subscription below the podcast, so the audience can actually subscribe to the platform as well. Uh,
Thank
and
you.
yes. So yeah, I think, yeah, proceeding ahead with the topic. I mean, we have recently seen the beginning of this decade has been kind of changed because the United States actually exited from Afghanistan. So, from this perspective, given the absence of US and NATO forces in Afghanistan since now, I think since mid 2021, I believe. So, can you tell us about the current status of extremist groups, their conflicts, activities, and more importantly, does the West still carry out counterterrorism operations in Afghanistan?
Okay. Well, if I could, I'd like to give a lead in. I'd like to lead into this with some background and context on the Islamic State Khorasan province, just so the listeners get a full understanding, and then I'll lead into this question because I think uh, the story of how leading up to the Taliban's takeover and how things have changed afterwards really should be put in this context. So, very quickly, the Islamic State Khorasan province has its origins in Pakistan and Afghanistan in late 2014, 2000 or early 2015. And that's when it was officially recognized as an Islamic State province by the Islamic State central leadership. And this was, around the time of the height of the caliphate in Iraq and Syria, the physical caliphate where they controlled territory. So this sent shockwaves throughout the world, and it had implications for regions, for many or multiple continents. So in Asia, one of the perhaps the most dangerous group right now is the Islamic State Khorasan province, and essentially the Islamic State Khorasan province, they rose a bit and then they declined. They gained some momentum in 2016 and 2017 before being degraded by a series of setbacks. And this was due to ramped up pressure from operations by the US, Afghan forces, and the Taliban. And as a result, hundreds of ISKP forces were killed, hundreds more were arrested and surrendered, leadership figures were killed, and their territory was rolled back. But following this general rise and decline from 2015 to 2019, ISKP found its legs again and started resurging in the summer of 2020. And they, at this point, they had previously held territory, and they switched up their strategy. And this is one they still continue to do. So ISKP placed less focus on seizing and holding territory, or at least abandoned it altogether for the time being. And they focused their efforts instead on a sustained campaign of militant attacks. So essentially, they were on the upswing again when the Taliban took over. And
Yes.
although they've been operating since 2014, 2015, it was really the August 2021 Kabul airport suicide bombing that brought them into global consciousness. And following the Taliban's takeover, ISKP's targeting selection changed. So instead of fighting the US, the previous government, and the Taliban and Pakistani forces all at once, it it started focusing solely on the Taliban in Afghanistan. It still operates to a much lower extent in Pakistan. So what happened here is the Taliban had to go from being a guerrilla insurgency to a government. And when you're a government, you have to develop a capable security apparatus, a military, a police force, and counterterrorism falls into this. So ISKP was able to take advantage of this really this turmoil, this rough transition that the Taliban was undergoing. And during this time, they were able to launch a lot of attacks targeting minority communities, vulnerable ones, Taliban forces. They even launched cross-border rocket attacks into Uzbekistan and Tajikistan. They hit the Pakistan embassy, the Russian embassy. They targeted Chinese nationals at a hotel in the capital, and they hit the Taliban's foreign ministry while a Chinese delegation was due to meet the Taliban representatives. But what this kind of inability of the Taliban to get ISKP under control seems to have, in recent months, they've improved their counterterrorism capabilities, their spy efforts, and they've really degraded ISKP. And this is observable in the decline of their attacks and the decline in their media or propaganda output. However, periods of silence or inactivity by ISKP often do not bode well, and they often break these silences with major attacks. And as to the question of whether the Americans still conduct operations in Afghanistan, they don't have official diplomatic relations with the Taliban, as they don't recognize them as a legitimate government yet. However, U.S. killed al-Qaeda's leader in the capital city of Afghanistan with an airstrike. So it's possible that there is also some intelligence sharing going on back channels or something of this sort. It's hard to tell at this moment.
All right. Yeah, I think these are very interesting insight. Most of this, I think, even I didn't know the attack on Pakistan embassy, the kidnapping of Chinese personnel, and I believe from this perspective, I mean, I have just read a few of the articles, and from my experience of following this topic, like Taliban has been historically groomed by the Pakistani agencies. But a significant rift has been created, I believe, since the US exit between the two parties. So, from your perspective, do you think this landscape of conflict has been an opportunity that is used as an opportunity, I would say, by ISKP?
Yes, well, these ISKP has looked to exploit any kind of rift or instability that arises in the region, and I think the biggest winner out of this is actually Taliban, the Afghan Taliban's ally, the Pakistani Taliban, or the TTP. And these groups have been able to use Afghan territory under the control of the Taliban to procure weapons, increase their firepower and arsenal, to recruit, train, plan operations, and receive funding. So this has actually added strategic depth to the Pakistani Taliban. And then back to the Islamic State Khorasan province, I think the attack on Pakistan's embassy in Kabul was meant to undermine or further undermine relations between the Taliban and Pakistan. And they have actually overtly stated this approach. They explicitly said that the goal in attacking, for instance, Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, targeting Chinese nationals, the Russian and Pakistani embassies, were to undermine the Taliban's foreign relations, because the Taliban's facing a quite severe humanitarian and economic crisis, and they're looking for foreign investment and aid. And these attacks serve to kind of bring pressure down upon the Taliban from these governments, including Pakistan. And they've also, ISKP has threatened economic projects in the region. For instance, in Uzbekistan, through a railway that's planned to run through from Uzbekistan through Afghanistan into Pakistan. And they have also threatened Chinese interest and promised to attack inside China, attack their cities from Afghan soil. And the Taliban's really looking to China for foreign investment and all kinds of other help to ameliorate the issues they're facing. So this is the kind of the strategy to make ISKP strategy to make the Taliban look incompetent and create a chill effect for foreign investment. And even they've been threatening humanitarian organizations. So they're trying to keep the Taliban in a weak state and prevent as much as they can foreign investment and humanitarian aid getting to the country. So it creates hostilities, hostile sentiment amongst the population against the ruling government.
All right. I believe you have covered most of this part, which I was going to actually ask a question furthermore, but I think, yeah, you covered this part as well, about how it operates and the kind of different branches that it has. So, to extend on the same lines, are the Taliban and ISKP well equipped to carry out espionage activities? I'm asking this question not only in the context of, the general information, but I saw that lately Wall Street Journal has released a small documentary on Wagner Group. So, in general, can you also include a perspective a little bit about how the private military companies might even become a part of what is happening in Afghanistan?
Okay, well, first I'll touch on the espionage activities, and this is something quite interesting because my colleague Ricardo Valle from the Khorasan Diary, he and I have been working and writing about internal Islamic State Khorasan province communications, and starting last summer, there's really an upsurge in warnings put out by official Islamic State Khorasan province channels that they were being infiltrated by Taliban operatives and even Iranian and other foreign operatives. So in one case, I was writing an article on or about like a kind of profile on this up and coming Tajik ideologue. And I was really interested in his activities because he was rising fast and he was really becoming influential. And then one day I checked one of the channels and they announced that he was killed. And this was a channel he was an administrator in, a moderator, and he'd always be in there speaking daily and talking about his daily activities. And so they posted that he had actually been killed. And how this happened was a Taliban mole infiltrated their network and gave away his position to the Taliban, and the Taliban subsequently raided his location, killed him and a number of other fighters. So after this, ISKP centralized their branch propaganda operations and implemented a warning system. They streamlined the system so that as soon as something like this happens, they put out a warning, or if um, suspected Taliban or other foreign actor trying to undermine or target ISKP's fighters who are talking online, they can put out warnings immediately. They say, do not interact with such and such account. And after the Tajik ideologue was killed, for instance, they started putting out wanted posters and even a booklet describing who this guy was. And interestingly, they said he was Russian. And the ISKP also, they have intelligence departments and agents and commanders and things like that. So they collect intelligence on the Taliban. They try to infiltrate and draw Taliban members away back into its ranks. But the Taliban's obviously has a much more robust apparatus it can draw upon. And I think there is always the possibility that private military contractors could come in or be called upon by the Taliban if things get too out of control, or even if they go to war with one of their neighbors. We saw the hostilities with Iran, for instance. There's tense relations with Tajikistan and Pakistan. So that is a possibility. And Russia does have growing ties with, the new ruling party in Afghanistan. Um, so this is always a possibility and something to keep an eye out for.
Interesting. I think one of the very important point you mentioned was about the propaganda. And so I was just curious on the same lines. So can you tell us how ISKP and Taliban are engaged in narrative warfare? Simultaneously, how other nations are using these narratives to push their respective agendas in Afghanistan? Because I believe right now the two countries that we see flashing in Afghanistan are China and India. So yeah, please proceed ahead.
Okay, well, I'll talk a little bit about ISKP's media apparatus, because they are unique as they are the only branch that has a sub IS central media propaganda outlet. And ISKP has underwent a process of regionalization and internationalization in its messaging since the Taliban takeover. And part of this is to gain advantages over the Taliban by, uh, well, they produce languages now, they produce propaganda now in more languages than any other branch since the height of the Islamic State caliphate in Iraq and Syria. And so what they're trying to do is they're trying to target communities in Asia, or in India, Central Asia, South Asia, and they've even started producing magazines in Arabic to build support and recruit from, or spread their message to, or gain fundraising money from people beyond the actual conflict theater. And this seems to have worked, as we are seeing a fair amount of Tajik, Uzbek, and Indian fighters, and fighters of other nationalities coming and joining ISKP.
All right. So I believe that my next question is actually again related to the narrative and communication, but from a technology perspective. So,
Mm.
like advanced communication technology, such as social media, of course, has given more access to terror groups. I mean, especially to cast a wide influence globally in a very short span of time. So,
Yeah.
can you please tell us how open source intelligence practice has become important and why the government should invest in educating the agencies about open source intelligence?
I think, for instance, when we look at the Islamic State, they have a a doctrine which was developed early after um, the caliphate was announced, and this is kind of cyber jihad or media jihad. And what they try to purvey is that um, those who help spread the narratives and the messages of the Islamic State are as just or every bit as important as the fighters on the front line. And they also there was a book written on the Islamic State that I recommend. It's called The Digital Caliphate, and this kind of goes into how important for instance, social media, messaging applications, the internet, the dark web, uh, all of these things are to even archival sites are to the Islamic State's uh, global media campaign. And interestingly, uh, a new unprecedented coalition of non-official but pro-Islamic State uh, media outlets have emerged, and they all came together under one umbrella and streamlined their operations. And now they're pumping out even more propaganda in way more language than the Islamic State Central is. And this is a massive development. And this is something that you would miss if you are not participating in OSINT activities and looking around. And also, it's important to social media companies. So I've spoken to some big social media companies, and they're very concerned about their efforts to counter Islamic State or any right wing terrorists or any um, ideology, whatever flavor, on their platforms. And even though they have full teams for it, these groups continue to figure out how to evade censorship. So I think that we need uh, to be able to understand how to employ OSINT techniques, and we should encourage people to learn these skills, and we should invest in these skills because you never know where the attack planning is going to take place. It could be in one of these channels. And we have seen, for instance, in our own monitoring, where there's chatter about an upcoming attack and then it happens. So it could even save lives in many instances. And I think the vast majority of intelligence that even governments use comes from publicly available information. And for instance, if we look at the Ukraine war, there's never been a war in history where you could see footage of essentially every square meter of this massive front line that has opened up. And this is unprecedented. And now the Russian government and the Ukrainian government and NATO governments, they're looking at this footage to see how their tactics went and other aspects, things they can exploit, weaknesses, what's working, what's not, how it actually happened in granular detail. So there's just the countless reasons why it's so important, especially today where access to information is unprecedented and there's so much to sort through. We need more people doing it.
Excellent. I think one of the points that you mentioned was about educating the people. And I believe it is very important that the agencies, even the government agencies, invest even to educate the civilians too. Maybe, through the medium of schools or colleges about open source intelligence, because I think it really has become an integral part of our life where uh, I mean, things are so open that an extremist can literally, gel in a civil life and possibly even cause an havoc to some of the critical systems of the government too. So, yeah, looking beyond the acquisition of traditional weapons by extremist or terror groups, I have observed in the past that Liberation Tigers of Tamil Elam, which is which was prominently actually operating in Sri Lanka and other parts of India. And that terror group had actually hacked the satellite of a company, American company called as Intelsat. And coming from the space industry, I'm worried that the rapid commercialization and privatization of space technology might trigger events where satellite tech, is easily acquired by terror groups in the future. I mean, there have been instances, even during the exit of United States from Afghanistan. So Iran used that as an opportunity to target the US base in Iraq. And they were able to target by procuring commercial satellite imagery. I mean, so this has come to a point where a person like even I can, possibly purchase a satellite imagery today and target something and become a national threat. So, I mean, this situation can highly destabilize, government operations to a larger extent. So, what are your thoughts on this evolving landscape of high quality weapon technology acquisition by terror groups? And is Taliban and ISKP already involved in acquiring such weapons?
Well, the Islamic State, for instance, the cyber jihad and the media jihad I mentioned earlier, that's not just about propaganda. The Islamic State has a organ in their part of their organizational culture is hacking, and so they formed various official hacking teams and unofficial hacking teams, and it is possible that they could. Hack into space tech, space uh, infrastructure. It's not my expertise, but they've hacked universities, government websites, all kinds of things before. Maybe perhaps even crypto exchanges, for a number of reasons. And so I think we'll have to wait and see. I'm not sure what the Taliban's status is, but perhaps the increase in or the improvement in counterterrorism that we see from them as of late, maybe they're receiving targeting information from aligned countries or countries they're pursuing relations with, and also in terms of technology transfers. We see that when conflicts break out, for instance, in Afghan or in Ukraine, the use of civilian drones has weaponized civilian drones has become widespread. And then I read a report recently where one of the major Mexican cartels used a weaponized drone for the first time. And so these groups are learning organizations. So if perhaps if one of them figures out how to do it, others will as well in terms of hacking space infrastructure or even satellites.
Yes, like thank you very much for these insights. I think I was completely unaware about the fact that a Mexican cartel actually used a weaponized drone. Uh, so I mean, things are already going out of the hand. But yeah, let's hope that the government agencies are able to regulate some things, not in
Yeah.
terms of commercialization, but at least kind of lay down a plan where we can possibly reduce this kind of acquisition by the terror groups.
And we even
Yeah.
see, for instance, reports of the Wagner Group, which is a semi state organization with a record of uh, war crimes, essentially. They have been reported to be using Chinese DJI drones, and they have whole teams devoted to DJI systems. So this is something to note as well, that paramilitary groups who could go rogue after the war, who knows, or even during the war, given the current tensions between Wagner and the Russian MOD. So yeah, there's dangers of these kind of shadowy PMCs and terror groups getting a hold of all kinds of advanced weaponry.
Yes. I agree with you about this actually. And given the current fluctuations in Pakistan's political and economic landscape, do you think Taliban might keep a close eye on territorial gains from Pakistan? And how will ISKP will react to such situations from your perspective?
It is hard to say because the Taliban, they're having a lot of troubles in their borderlands. I just wrote an article for Nikkei Asia, and I was looking at what's going on in on their Central Asian border. They're fighting with Iran sporadically on that border, and they're having increasing problems with Pakistan on the border. So yeah, they're going to be hyper vigilant about what goes on there. And the Islamic State Khorasan province, they're looking to exploit any rift or any kind of chaos that would give their organization the opportunity to undermine the Taliban, or maybe drag them into, or provoke them uh, into some kind of conflict with their neighbors. So there's always this chance, because uh, the invasion of Afghanistan by a foreign power would create a lot of chaos, and a lot of power vacuums, and undergoverned areas for them to exploit. So yeah, these are all possibilities for sure.
Okay. Yeah, thank you for these insights actually. And I believe we are already nearing the end of the episode. So finally, what message would you like to give to the students and research scholars stepping into the field of counterterrorism, peace, and conflict studies?
Well, I would recommend, for instance, reaching out to, because of the importance of the internet, as we spoke about earlier. You can learn so much about the profession online, about OSINT techniques online, and also form uh, do a lot of networking with people you admire, or people who have proven track records in the field that you wish to pursue. And most of the time they'll be nice and respond to you with tips. I also recommend publishing early, whether it's with you can aim for prominent publications, or even just small publications. But the more you work with editors, the more seasoned you become. And I also recommend, when you're actually doing the research, uh, what you want to do is you want to get a good understanding of the geographical area, the ethnic makeup, and the linguistic makeup of the area, and then the group you're looking at. Focus on their history. So I really stress that you want a vast historical knowledge of groups you study, because it can help you forecast the future. And another thing is, find out how to gain access to, for instance, and be careful in doing so. You don't want to get flagged and have your house raided or anything, but find out how to
Yes.
gain access to um, channels on, Telegram or whatever, so that you can watch how these groups talk to each other, how they interact, and also read the propaganda that they put out, if you have the stomach for it, because it can be quite ghoulish and gross at times. But you want to understand what they think, how they perceive themselves, and what they're saying their intent is going to be. Because because this applies to looking at state actors, polarizing ones such as Putin. Just because you may hate him, uh, listen to what he says and try to understand what he's thinking. Even if it's propaganda, you can start to understand his tendencies as a leader. Or if you're looking at terrorist groups, then you can really understand the discourse, like get deeply get a deep understanding of their discourse, their organizational culture, their internal communications. So yeah, I recommend this, and a good text for the Islamic State actually to understand their doctrine, their early and evolving doctrine, is the ISIS Reader, and this is written by Ingram, Whiteside, and Winter, and it is the English translation of the most important statements put out by the Islamic State movement throughout its history. And that's my recommendation if you're looking at the Islamic State.
Thank you very much, Lucas. I believe uh, you have given a real and extended message to the young generation stepping into this field, and I hope the audience really loves this podcast. As I believe we came across several points which potentially can be made into an episode maybe in the future as the
Yep.
developments proceed ahead. So yeah, thank you again very much for your time on the podcast.
Yep.
And I'll be also for the audience. This is a message that I'll be putting up the link to Militant Wire in the description section. So you
Yep.
can actually either you can choose whether which subscription you want. I'll be directly putting up the subscription link, and you can read the publication as well. So I'll be putting up the social media links as well of Militant Wire so that you can access their channels directly through the description section. Thank you very
Yep.
much.
And
Yeah.
any listeners, feel free to reach out to me if you have any further questions. I like to interact with all kinds of people, so I'd be glad to
Yes,
speak.
yes,
Yeah.
definitely. Yeah. I'll put up the contact details, so not an issue at all. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Yes.